All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this week's episode of Weekly Hope. I'm Kirsten Hagland, your host. And as always, I start off by welcoming you all with my co-host here, Elsa. We're coming to you live. It's about midnight here, just a little bit after in Zurich, Switzerland. 6 p.m. on the East Coast in the United States, 3 p.m. on the West Coast in California. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us. This is our third official episode. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. As you can tell, this is a very, very informal conversation. But we like to bring on some experts from the field of eating disorders and mental health to talk about some obviously extremely important issues. But we do so in an environment that is safe, informal, relaxed, conversational. And if you're joining us for the first time, please, and even if you're not joining us for the first time, make sure that you let us know in the comments section who you are, your name, where you're signing in from. And we want to welcome your questions and comments throughout this conversation. It's important for us to just be able to hear from you and to also help you have this opportunity to have an expert who is sitting here and that you can ask them questions and talk to them about whatever's on your mind. So make sure that you say hello and take that chance to ask questions, whatever's on your mind. So this week, we want to talk about something obviously extremely important, but also very, very timely, because June is PTSD Awareness Month. And throughout the month, we have been posting articles from eatingdisorderhope.com about trauma, about PTSD, about co-occurring eating disorders and trauma, and what that recovery process is like, and just really wanted to join with the rest of the mental health field in bringing recognition to this, and talking about what it may be like for someone who does have an eating disorder as well as trauma, what that recovery process is like, and how to heal. And in order to do that and delve into this topic, I want to bring on and welcome our guest for this week, Dr. Jeannie Burnett, who's joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Let's welcome Jeannie to the show. Jeannie, hello.
What's up, Kirsten?
Hey. So Jeannie is not only an expert in the field, but she is also a good friend of mine. So I'm enjoying this as well. Just want to say hello. Samantha Breyer is joining us again. Thank you. Welcome back, Samantha and Pamela. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, guys. So Jeannie, you have been in the field for years, and you've been doing.
I'm not going to say how many. No, I'm kidding. About 20 years now.
That's incredible. And this is something that I know that you're really passionate about. So let's just start off. I feel as though, and I haven't been in this field, obviously for very, very long, the last 10 years. And I feel as though trauma is something that has just been talked about more and more, and that there's just an increasing awareness of trauma, especially as it relates to eating disorders in particular. So I guess my first question to you is, what is trauma specifically? Because I think that people have a really different idea of what it is. And so maybe a real concrete definition would be helpful. And then, is this something that you think is on the rise, or is it just something that we're hearing about more, and so more professionals and clinicians are saying, hey, this is probably at the root of a lot more issues than we thought, so we need to be talking about it?
Good start. However, I do want to post a disclaimer first, because I believe the main two things that are key and central to anybody is feeling safe and feeling loved. And trauma really, really gets into the whole safety issue. And so I want to make sure that everyone out there that's watching or listening is in a safe place. And if anything that we talk about, I'm not going to talk about specific, issue, like things that have happened to people, but if there's anything that triggers anyone, I want them to feel like safe enough and take care of themselves to stop watching and to go do some things that are going to be self-soothing. So I just am very, very aware, because I work with a lot of clients that do have trauma, that the most benign statement sometimes can throw them into a reaction. So I just want to put that out there first. But the other thing is that I, as a clinician, I mean, I know all the definitions and the DSM, but I like to bring things down to just basic level, like to where, my mother could understand, and she doesn't have any clinical background at all. So I think that trauma is anything, honestly, anything that causes pain. And there is a huge continuum of what is traumatic. There's big T trauma and little t trauma. And then I sort of have created for the clients and the work that I do a middle T trauma. But I want people to understand that there is this continuum. And so what I say that, what the definition of a big T trauma might be, might feel medium or small to someone, and vice versa. If something is small, it might feel big. So the big T trauma is something that is of a massive proportion that basically our brains cannot tolerate. They can't really understand. So things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, world catastrophes, the 9/11 bombings, different things like that, that cause sort of this internal and external ricochet and change life and change behavior. For example, I remember after the 9/11 bombings that like everyone felt unsafe almost to go outside. It was just this wave that permeated the United States. And similarly, like when there was the shooting in Aurora, Colorado, like I was like, well, I'm not going to a theater anytime soon. But before that, there was a sense of safety to go and do something that's common like that. Little T trauma is something that is typically minor and repetitive. And so if somebody, and again, I don't want to belittle anyone, but like somebody that picks on you, maybe you know that they like you, but maybe you're sensitive, and so they pick on you, or they're bullying you or something, but it's a repetitive thing. And then I say like the middle T traumas are really relational. Like my parents' divorce felt like, it didn't feel like something small, but I knew it wasn't big, like a major catastrophe. So I say, okay, it's sort of like in the middle there. Like it was enough for me to develop an eating disorder from it, but like I don't have like flashbacks and nightmares and all those things that come with PTSD. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my question is that I can hear in my head, because so much of my work has dealt with, over the past decade or so, trying to create awareness about eating disorders amongst people who have had no experience with them. And there's so much misunderstanding. And there is so often the response, something like, well, why don't people just eat, et cetera, et cetera. All of that. And so I hear the critics in my head quite a bit, and what their objections are. And while I hear everything you're saying, what do we say to a culture that their comeback always is, well, we're just a society of, nobody has any backbone anymore. Not everything is traumatic. What about 150 years ago when we didn't even have this concept? Or our kids are just weak. There's all of that cultural backlash to talk about trauma, and especially the way that you and many other clinicians are defining it, which I think is obviously incredibly helpful for people who are struggling. But what do we say to a culture that's their general wisdom and that's what they come back with?
Well, So in my mind, I can hear, and I hate to pick on the older generations because I know that, anyway, I'll pick on the older generation. I've got plenty of them in my family, which is like, just pick up your bootstraps and walk on and get over it and blow it off and don't think about that anymore. Well, those are all of the skills and the tools that they used. That was their coping skills. And I think we can see very clearly from our society, because those people have had children and those children have had children and so on, that really doesn't work. And so, you know, one of the main things that I think is so powerful about therapy is validation. And people invalidate people so much. And you might say to me, oh, Jeannie, you know, that really is, it's not that big of a deal. Well, it might not be to you because it's not happening to you, but it is to me. Maybe the fabric of who I am is connected to a belief system that's happening around me. And so what I would say, I really don't think that the culture at large is going to hear anything that I would have to say, but I would say to the people that are being affected by that, move on. Don't worry about what they say. Like, it's almost like whatever the advice is coming from them, use it against them and validate yourself. And if you can't have, if you aren't able to do that, then I would suggest that you find somebody that can help teach you how to do that.
Yeah, that's such good advice. You know, and I think too, we have to combat the messages not only from culture, but also in our own minds. And I think there's probably a connection to the same way that a lot of people with eating disorders feel like they're not worth treatment or they're not sick enough for care. That same kind of self-doubt happens with what someone has experienced or the trauma that they've experienced. So I want you to give us a window into when these things are not addressed, when the underlying trauma is not addressed. How does that affect someone's life, physically, emotionally, spiritually, their mental health and well-being in the long term? Because sometimes we need to hear, hey, this really does affect you. We can't keep stuffing it down.
Right. So I'm so glad you asked. First of all, people think that something that is said to you is simply a mental thing. It's a hearing thing, but it's mental. But verbal abuse turns into anything that is said or done to you that is invalidating, that creates pain, becomes physical. So one of the things that is true for anyone that's had trauma or that's got an eating disorder, and this is why people that have trauma have eating disorders and vice versa, is because it becomes a physical manifestation. Our body is a container and a vessel. And I constantly talk with my clients about your body as a vessel. And so if somebody says something to you and it's a joke and you think it's funny, you turn and you do something. Your behavior is a physical thing. You laugh. Similarly, if someone does something to you and it's painful, the natural inclination and the healthiest thing is to cry. But because of mental facility and capacity, we don't necessarily do that. We might stuff it. Well, it's not going out of your body. It's going somewhere. It might be going into your heart. It might be going into your stomach. It's going somewhere. So trauma is a physical thing. We talk about trauma as having, like, if someone is sexually abused or physically abused, people can have physical memory from their cells. So you might have this cellular memory. Like even if you think about, like, I know sometimes you have to travel. And so when you're not around Elsa, if you're laying in bed at night, you might go, oh, I can feel Elsa. Like, you can just think about hugging her or feeling her fur. And so in our brains, we develop this attachment using all five senses. And so mental becomes physical. And the next thing that happens is we have this observation capacity, whether we hear it or we see it or we smell it or we feel it physically. We have this scene in our body that holds the whole memory. And so what we do with that is it becomes this situation in our head. And so the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations that are around that all become connected. And then I think that one of the primary things that can maintain a traumatic experience is the negative belief system that develops in our head. You and I know that the most powerful thing that we ever speak begins with I am. We are what we say after I am. I am strong. I am weak. I am happy. I am scared. I am not important. So whatever we think about ourselves in relation to that situation sort of maintains and holds that in place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And can we talk about how that happens? Because I mean, I have yet to work all this out, and I am working on it, but I'm working through, as you very well know, some relational trauma that has taken place in my life in the last couple of years. And it took a while for me to wake up to that, though, to understand that that was what it was. Because I was working from that I am strong mentality, but really there were other coping mechanisms underlying that. And so it took me years to wake up. What is the point? How do people get to a place where they do wake up to the system, as you so described, that they've created, the false beliefs that they've created as a result of trauma, whether they're physical and or mental, or probably both, as you so accurately described? How does someone, what's the catalyst?
Well, when you keep things inside, your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and you are feeling a sense of shame connected to that. So I know you very well. I know the circumstance you're talking about. And so for you to not, number one, it blows my mind that you didn't speak out about it. I mean, and maybe you did, but and I don't know who that was to. But the only way that I know that can sort of turn that light bulb on inside of someone's head is to put it outside of your body. For example, if you put it, like if I've got clients that if they don't know how to speak, they don't have the right words, or they don't know the feelings or whatever, I'll say, draw it. And so when something is outside of your body and you can look at it, then it gives you a different perspective. You have a bird's eye view of it. You're not letting it roll around in your head. Now, I know a lot of people out there are going to go, I can't talk about what happened. Like, it was my father, or it was my brother, or whatever it was. I have so much shame. So the belief system that develops there is, I am bad. And I want people to understand that you're a vessel. And if bad things happen to you, bad things have to come out. The conversation has to come out. And that is the only way that people can heal. I will take anybody on who says that that's not the case. You know me, I'm a bulldog, so I'll take it on. I want to actually show everyone sort of I like to do visuals. I talk with my hands, I draw. Like I make everyone at my center have a whiteboard in their office. And so we have a plethora of whiteboards at the office because they're so powerful. So like you and I can have this conversation, and you might have something in your head and I have something else in my head. But if I draw, looking at the same thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. So let's get the visual.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
Okay. Okay, I want to make sure you can, my phone. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it. There's a sun, and it says conscious, and yes.
Unconscious.
Yes.
Okay.
And before you start, I just want to say hello to Shauna. She's letting us know that she's here from Ireland. So thanks, Shauna, for joining us. I love
All right. Okay. can you grab me some more, a red one? I just dropped all my stuff. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take you to the beach, right? I don't think you have much beach in Switzerland, right?
We have lake beaches, not ocean beaches.
As we do here in Atlanta.
Yes.
So this is, I don't even know how or when I developed this, but this is just a visualization that I use repeatedly because people really get stuff from it. So I love the beach. So here is above the ocean, and this is below the ocean. Above the ocean, metaphorically, is our consciousness, our awareness of what's happening here and now. Below the ocean is our unconscious. And basically, this is a collection of everything that we have experienced from today, which is the top of the water line, all the way back down to birth, okay? So this kind of reflects like all of the stuff that we've ever been through, the things you remember, the things you don't, okay? And so I'm gonna use myself in this example. I developed an eating disorder when I was 14. I was not physically nor sexually abused, so I want to dispel the myth that you have to have one of those experiences in order to have an eating disorder, or in order to be validated if you have an eating disorder. That's crap. Okay, you have an eating disorder, it's because you have a very good reason. You're trying to figure out how to cope with all this stuff. So when I was 8, my parents divorced. Okay, you see that? Can you see that?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this is, now granted, I mean, it really should be down here, but I want you to be able to see it. So
yeah.
This is today, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that's gone on between the time I was 8 and today, right? So what I call this is a trauma bubble, okay? And I want people to understand, I believe that post-traumatic stress is actually not just the big, you know, I'm having nightmares and I'm having reactions and I'm having flash. There are so many subtle things that I believe could be considered a post-traumatic reaction. So for example, someone breaks up with someone or gets a divorce and they're like, oh God, I could not enter into another relationship right now because they need time to heal, right? That is a bit of a post-traumatic stress. And whatever issue you had in your first relationship, lots of times you carry it into your next relationship. And so the fears that were developed in that first relationship that was bad, you're going to drag along and you're going to work, if you don't talk about it, you're going to act it out. And so it's going to impact that relationship, right? So that's not a post-traumatic stress like definition, but that's a post-traumatic stress reaction, right? So yeah. Just like big T, little t, middle T, there are lots of, I think the dimension of PTSD has yet to be discovered.
Yeah,
okay?
So true.
Right, so parents divorced when I was 8. You know, I'm almost 50. I've never been married. I wonder why. I was an only child. My parents had their issues, addiction, emotion, too much emotion, lots of stuff. And so I resolved that issue for myself by never getting married. So one of the things that in this, I think there are 3 components in this trauma bubble, okay? And I've already kind of talked about it, but I want to make it clear. So there's 3 parts to this, right? There's the peace sign or Mercedes, whichever you want.
We're near Germany, so we'll call it Mercedes. Or at least I am.
Whatever, okay, whatever those words were. Okay, so in the first part, we have the situation, right? The situation, who I am in that situation leads me to the belief of I am. Now, I'll tell you the biggest belief system that's out there that kind of encompasses everything is I am not good or good enough. Okay?
Yep.
Most people out there believe that. I have believed that because of my parents' divorce, because of all this other stuff. And let me tell you, it's crap. Okay? Your personal history may validate it, but your spiritual direction will not. So the situation leads to the belief system, which leads to pain, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't ever deal with stuff, it stays there. Forgetting about it, it will still creep up through your behavior. If you don't talk out something, you're going to act it out. That's a line I've said for 10 or 12 years. So here I am at 8. So if I have this belief system that I am not good enough, and I've never worked on any of this stuff, that trauma and that pain is going to continue with me, and it makes me sensitive. And so let's say I like a guy and really, and I'm in this relationship, and then he decides to leave, right? Well, in a divorce, somebody leaves. So I'm sensitive to rejection. And so that is where my trauma from the past meets my life today.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think that people need to understand is if you're having a reaction to a situation, and even you think it's too big for the situation, like bigger than the situation warrants, then that's trauma. Point blank. There is something underneath the surface that you haven't dealt with that's causing you to not be able to manage. Okay? So the way to work through this, I mean, I'm a Christian, and so I always say, God said, I am that I am. It's the most personal thing he's ever said. And so the most personal things we ever say, like I said before, begin with I am. And so if your I am statement is I am not good enough, then you've got to figure out how to change that. And not just know it, but believe it. We believe and we change our behavior based on what we believe. We can know stuff. So it's like if you know, positive affirmations, I'm not a real big person on positive affirmations. Because if it's something that you don't believe, what's the point?
Yeah, right? You can say it, right. You can say it all day long, but if you don't believe it in your heart, then it's not going to actually make a difference in your body and in your
right. Because you want to feel the freedom. And again, emotion and trauma, regardless of how it enters your system, it's in your body until you release it. And so you've got to figure out a way to feel that sense of that breath of fresh air, that the truth will set you free. And so it's so important to like recognize and acknowledge that your body is containing a lot of crap if you believe a lot of crap.
Yeah, so good. You know, and thank you so much for that diagram. That is super helpful, and it's so helpful to see things visualized like that.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sit down again. I'm hot.
Yeah, go for it. You know, I want
to I feel like I'm at church.
Okay. You are. Preach, sister. I want to go back to something you said about how, you know, you didn't necessarily have sexual abuse in your past, and there has existed like a hierarchy with eating disorders that a lot of people consider, you know, in a totally messed up way, a hierarchy of what's a better eating disorder to have versus one that people are more ashamed of having. And I think too that the more we learn about trauma and how it is at the root of so many issues, that there becomes this hierarchy of which trauma is worse or more valid, etc. Talk about that myth busting and, you know, help validate maybe people who are listening who say, well, I didn't have this traumatic sexual experience, or I didn't come back from fighting in a war overseas, so my trauma must not be real trauma.
Okay, so here's what I typically say about that is I believe that we all have sensitivity. I think we're born with it. as babies, you know, we're hungry, we cry, we're wet, we cry. Like, we don't know how to say, hey, I'm hungry, give me some food. And so we just have this inbred sensitivity. And regardless of what happens, anything can be validated because it's you. You have your own story. You, Kirsten, have your own story. I have my own story. And that's the only story that we have to live. Like, just because I haven't been sexually abused, I mean, I would never, ever wish that on me nor anyone else. Like, even my biggest enemy, I would never, ever, ever wish that on anybody.
Yeah.
Because it's just horrific. And God didn't make our brains to tolerate like major sources of pain. And I think that's why we have issues like eating disorders and alcohol addictions and multiple personalities, because people are trying to cope with their traumas. And so just because someone doesn't have a big T trauma doesn't mean that their life is invaluable or invalid, or their experience is invalid. That again is the invalidation that will perpetuate the shame and the pain and the powerlessness that you feel. Yeah. And I believe those are the three main emotions that are detrimental to anyone.
Yeah, go back and say them again. Yeah.
Shame, pain. Okay. Now, I do believe people we can learn coping skills to deal with pain. Shame is absolutely pointless and useless. And powerlessness is, I think, that plight of man. I think every single person feels powerless in some way, and how we cope with that powerlessness can get us into trouble, or it can help us grow. Yeah. And so those things are the main, if you can figure out how to not shame yourself and not let anyone else shame you, if you can tolerate your own pain and learn how to, it's like, I always like to say, it's like working out, you know. Do I like to go lift weights at the gym? No, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but later on, I got guns, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And so the other thing is,
ma'am.
Woohoo!
So does Elsa. Elsa has guns. She's like, I don't want to be on camera. Don't show my gun.
Oh my God, you're crazy. I love it. Hi, Elsa. Anyway, the last one is powerlessness. And so powerlessness is that just, it's everybody feels it. You know, you can't change your mom. You can't change, you know, your little brother. You can't change your friend's idea, and she's dating this crazy guy. And so there's this sense of powerlessness, and that's just something that we have to accept and learn to cope with.
Yeah. So, this is so good. You're so good.
We'll do it again. I've still got stuff to do, so we'll do it again.
Good. So, you know, just kind of in our last little bit here, let's talk about the specificities. Is there a way that trauma affects or impacts someone with an eating disorder, or the onset of an eating disorder in a particular way? Are there certain signs and symptoms to look for? Maybe if someone's listening and they say, I think this might be a part of my story, you know, how do the two go together and interact?
With the trauma and the eating disorder?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I always say is the devil is in the details, and specifics matter. For example, I had a woman who, this was years ago, who would not ride in an elevator. And the one time she got on, there was a red, you know, that red stop button you push?
Yeah.
And that was connected to a trauma from when she was a little kid. And so it made her have flashbacks and reactions that she couldn't handle. So our brain is connected so intricately that a trauma, well, let me just say this. Trauma starts in the back of our head and then it moves forward, right? So the back of our brain is our like our animal brain. It's like a dog. Like if I'm scared, my hair might stand up, and that's the fight, flight, and freeze area. And then from there, it moves into the emotion, and our emotions and our senses get activated. And then it moves into the forefront where we try and put reason and interpretation and understanding. So when someone's had that kind of an experience, it's like they've been hit over the head or inside of your brain with a piece of glass, and it shatters everywhere. And so you know how when you drop a glass on the floor, like 6 months later, you might find a little bitty blue sliver from that glass that you dropped. That's exactly what trauma is like. And so because it impacts our brain so intensely, it impacts our whole system. And our corporal body is where we contain most of everything because of our vagus nerve. So this is the physical aspect again. The vagus nerve goes from the back of our brain, and it comes through our necks, and it goes through every major system in our corporal body. So our heart, our lungs, our organ, just everything. And so when our guts get that sense and that pain, then it responds, like the rest of our body responds. And so people with eating disorders are trying to cut that down. And so they're trying to cope with the pain. They're trying to say, I don't feel anything in my gut. No, I don't feel anything in my stomach. And so if I don't eat, then I don't feel. Or if I do eat, then I got to get rid of it. And so it's like the food is taking that pain and it's getting rid of it. So either way, and then the binge eating behavior is, I'm going to take this food and I'm going to stuff it, and I'm going to pretend it's not there, and I'm going to numb out. So all three eating disorders, nobody is the same. No eating disorder is better than the other.
Yes.
They all function to survive and cope.
Yeah. You know what? Shauna is asking a great question in our comments section. She says, can Jeannie explain the difference in complex PTSD and PTSD? And that is something that I've been hearing a lot more about lately. What is the difference between the two?
Okay. So complex, well, there's PTSD is, okay, I was 17 years old and I was raped at a party. Okay, that's a horrific experience. And it was a one time, but the rest of my life is pretty stable and I have to cope with that. And so that, it's almost like that's a one-time isolated event. Complex PTSD is exactly what it sounds like. It's complex. Maybe I have a rejecting mother. Maybe it was my father that hurt me sexually. And maybe we live in a situation like in the boonies where I don't have any access to care, or I don't have any access to talk to anyone. And so it's multiple situations that make the person believe the crap that's in their head because it's a crappy situation. So complex PTSD is literally like different types and forms of trauma. So I believe that attachment is first and foremost in anybody's life. And so if you have any sense of rejection, like let's say your mother was a drug addict and she, abandoned you and put you up for adoption or whatever. So let's say you have that, and then you have someone that's molested you, and then you have, your uncle that you're now living with, he looks at you weird and gives you the creeps. So that's complex right there.
Right.
Because there are multiple sources of trauma. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I think that was a really, really good clarification, and thank you for that. For people who are listening and this is really ringing bells for them, and I also love the disclaimer that you gave us at the beginning to just make sure that people felt safe, and that if they needed to sign off, that was good and healthy and right. And, you know, we do have a lot of people that tune in and are in need of some hope. And I think there's a similar sense among, perhaps, I hate to use the word victim because I don't think it's healthy to think about it that way, but people who have suffered from, whether it's complex PTSD or other trauma, little t trauma, and eating disorders, often wonder if there's hope for long-lasting recovery. And so you are an extremely inspirational person as well as a good teacher. So what encouragement can you give people out there who are listening that, you know, there is life on the other side of this, or there is life through it, or that things do get better? What does the recovery journey look like?
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's why I love, like, when I first became a psychologist, because I had had my own eating disorder from 14 to 18, I was like, I ain't no way I'm working with people with eating disorders. And God had another plan for me. Ha. And so one of the things that I always tell the people that I work with is, you know why I love working with you? Because you're a pain in the ass. And you have tenacity, and you have, I mean, anybody that is going to develop an eating disorder and eat too much and vomit, or not eat when they're starving, has a lot of determination. And so that just needs to be redirected, and you can take over the world. Like, seriously, like I get chills whenever I say that. But people that have eating disorders are very stubborn. They're very tenacious. And you just need to take that energy and stop hating on yourself and start advocating in the world, and you will make a huge difference.
We agree.
What's up, Elsa?
She has been a huge, as you know, emotional support to me as I've worked through stuff in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I want to say this too.
Yeah.
I now have 3 dogs. I went from 0. I went from 1 cat of 20 years to 3 dogs. And I think, and we, like, there are 3 of us here, and we each bring our dogs on different days. And the dogs are so comforting to people. Yeah. And I would say, like, I know there are people out there right now that are like, screw it, I'm out of here. I'm leaving this earth because there's too much that I have to deal with.
Yeah.
Get a dog. And I know that sounds crazy, but get a dog, and it will give you a sense of hope and purpose again, because dogs they're just amazing.
Yeah.
And I think they're like God in a little furry body, because they're unconditionally loving.
Seriously. And you know what? I didn't even think about sharing this beforehand, but I just realized that this is so perfect because I rescued Elsa. Elsa is a rescue dog. She was in a puppy mill for the first 6-7 years of her life. She was a mom to 6 litters of dogs. And and she was kept in a cage her entire life. And her jaw was broken from trying to bite on the cage. So talk about...
Oh, stop.
Yeah.
That hurts me.
Yeah. So she is rescued from a traumatic situation. And now I take care of her. And now she's super codependent. But she's been sitting in my lap this entire time, and she's just totally chill. But and that has been hugely healing for me to take care of her, knowing the history that she has, and for her to heal. And now it took her about a year, but she is a happy, loving, joyful, she's not skittish anymore. She loves to go outside. She feels safe now, and
safe and loved.
She's recovered in some way. And so I guess I just want to make sure that people out there hear that, like, you don't have to suffer from the effects of trauma your whole life, that therapy works, that this is not just, your amazing visualization there on a chalkboard, and this isn't just a Facebook Live. Like, this is real. People do recover and go on to live healthy, safe and
productive, giving lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeannie, you just rock. Thank you so much.
You rock, Kirsten.
Really, thank you. This has been so incredibly helpful and super practical. Shauna just said that yes, that you explained it perfectly.
Good.
So thank you so much for your time. Of course, we will definitely have you back because there's so much more to discuss, and your expertise is just across the spectrum. And just want to let everyone know too, if you're watching this later, please still just let us know. We could come back on here and look at the comments section. So please, again, just say hello and let us know where you're from. And we are here every Wednesday on our Facebook Live Weekly Hope discussing various topics. So let us know too. Send us a message on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram at Eating Disorder Hope about what topics that you'd like to hear about, and we'll try to bring someone in so that we can address those things. But this is all about trying to have just an informal conversation about these extremely important issues and offer you a place where you can share your thoughts and hopefully get some inspiration and some hope as well. So that is the end of this week's episode. Jeannie, thank you from the bottom of my heart and all of our audience. Yeah, it was a joy to have you, and we will see you back again very, very soon.
See you later. Talk to you soon.
Good night, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.